Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's great to be here on this beautiful Sabbath morning. We don't have a big physical crowd here, but I can see lots of people here in spirit, And I want to welcome those who are watching online or who may watch this later. How many of you were here when I was here last time? Couple. My topic was lessons from the son of Nun, and I asked everyone, anybody know who Nun was and who his son was? And I didn't get a great response. Does anybody remember now? Anybody? Oh man, I was very impressive last time, huh? Joshua. Son of Nun was Joshua. And it's a book that a lot of people know a little bit about, but not a lot of people know a lot about. For those of you who weren't here, and for those of you, I guess, who were, because obviously there's not a lot of recall. We didn't get very far last time. We only got the Israelites crossing the Jordan, and then I spent quite a bit of time on the story of Rahab, which I think is a beautiful story. I talked a lot about the scarlet cord that traces back to our Messiah. But the book itself is really rich with lessons. If you spend some time in it and you spend some time kind of digging down into the details, which is where our Father really likes to hide things for those who want to diligently seek Him. And the main thing is that the conquest of the Promised Land for the Israelites very much parallels our walk of faith today. What they went through is what we're going through right now. Now, at the end of my message last time, I said, if I come back, if I'm invited back, I may do part 2 of Joshua, son of Nun, because the original wasn't called part 1. It's been 4 months. I did this in December. That's not great for a series, as we just discovered. But I'm going to dig into it anyway. And I will tell you there will be no part 3. We're actually going to cross the Jordan, get to Jericho, and through the entire book in hopefully maybe 45 minutes or so. So just a quick preamble. There's 39 books in the Old Testament, and one of them is called Joshua. So that alone should tell us there's something perhaps significant here about this man and his impact on Israel's history. The book itself is the first of 12 historical books in Scripture. It starts with Joshua, ends in Esther, and it's kind of forges a link between the first 5 books of the Bible, sometimes called the books of Moses or the Torah or the Pentateuch, and the rest of Israel's history. Now, I was going to say, if you remember, Joshua's original name, but anyway, if you didn't remember Joshua, you probably didn't remember what his original name was. It was Hoshea, which means salvation. For it appears that Moses changed his name to Yehoshua, which means Yahweh is salvation. And you can read that in Numbers 13 if you want to look it up. He's also called Yeshua. It's a shortened form of Yehoshua. And the Hebrew equivalent, if you look in the Septuagint, is Jesus, which is where the name Jesus is derived. In fact, if you look in the Septuagint, the Greek title of the book is Iesus Nos, Yeshua or Joshua, the son of Nun. But it's not just his name, but also his actions, and we talked about this in the last study. If you're curious, you can maybe go back and listen to it. But they parallel, in very many unique ways, his future namesake, which is obviously our Messiah. And ultimately, he ends up redeeming the land promised to Abraham and to Moses, and he gives the nation a period of rest. But it wasn't permanent. As we read in Hebrews 4:8, for if Joshua had given them rest, then he, Yahweh, would not afterward have spoken of another day. So the true rest of God's people will come through the better Yehoshua, our Messiah, Jesus. Now, the book of Joshua is a book about war. I talked about this last time. But it's not about Israel being attacked. It's about them being the aggressor throughout the book. But before you go to battle, you need to make preparations. Ephesians chapter 6, beginning in verse 10, says, "Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil." It's a very, very familiar passage. It goes on to say, "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day." I would say that probably includes today. "And having done all, to stand." The whole armor of God, it's stated twice just in this short passage. And when do you put it on? Before you step into the battle. So this book is about what happens when you put on the whole armor of God against the enemy, and what happens when you don't. There are 3 major military campaigns in the book of Joshua against approximately 30 enemy armies. And through these encounters, the people of Israel learned crucial lessons under Joshua's leadership. So, let's get started. If you have a Bible handy and you want to come with me to, where should I start? How about Joshua? And we'll start with chapter 1, Joshua chapter 1. And beginning in verse 5, this is our Father's edict directly to Joshua. He's speaking directly to Joshua. He says, "No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and of good courage, for to this people you shall divide as an inheritance the land which I swore to their fathers to give them." I will pause there for a second. Why does God tell Joshua to be strong and courageous? Well, if you just superficially read through this thing, you would say, well, he's a military commander. They're going to fight all these enemies. Of course, he needs to be strong and he needs to be courageous. But that's actually not why our Father is telling Joshua to be strong and courageous. If we pick it back up, "Only be strong and very courageous, that you may observe to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you." This has nothing to do with physical prowess going into battle. He's telling them it takes strength and courage to observe and live this law which Moses received from our Father. And for those of us trying to walk in the way of Yehoshua, Jesus, we often find ourselves in the midst of battle against those in the world and the forces behind them. And it does take a different kind of strength and courage to walk this walk. It's not the courage that you usually attribute to fighting an enemy. I'm always curious when I see these things, these words and these phrases, and especially when I find out it doesn't really mean what I thought it meant. This word strength, hazak, the Hebrew word actually has a whole list. If you look in Strong's or wherever, it's got a whole list of meanings. It's translated, be strong. But when we think about following in the footsteps of Yehoshua, a few other meanings of the word might also be appropriate. I like this first one, obstinate. Probably because it kind of fits my character. Some may say stubborn. You can ask my wife about that later. To be constant, to fortify, to prevail, to be sure, or to withstand. Let's read on. Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may prosper wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate in it day and night, that you may observe to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Do not be afraid, nor be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. So the first lesson that we learn here in part 2 is victory comes through faith in our Father and obedience to his word, not through our own human strength or intellect. Romans 8, beginning in verse 31, says, "What then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but delivered him up for us all, how shall he not with him also freely give us all things? Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation, or distress, or persecution, or famine, or nakedness, or peril, or sword? Yet in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us." So let's take a look at a practical application here in the book of Joshua. Let's call it Lessons from Jericho. So if you want to come with me, if you're still in your Bible, come with me to Joshua chapter 3. Joshua chapter 3, beginning in verse 1. We read, "Then Joshua rose early in the morning, and they set out from Acacia Grove and came to the Jordan, he and all the children of Israel, and lodged there before they crossed over. So it was, after 3 days, that the officers went through the camp, and they commanded the people, saying, 'When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God and the priests, the Levites, bearing it, then you shall set out from your place and go after it. Yet there shall be a space between you and it, about 2,000 cubits by measure.'" Again, let's dig into this, what doesn't seem to have a whole lot going on for it. They're just getting ready to start out. But the first thing we read is that Joshua rose early in the morning. Now, the original text denotes at dawn or daybreak. He wasted no time in preparing to be about our Father's business. Now, I want to chastise myself here, but how often do we, myself included, choose not to seize the day, only to find the day over with nothing really fruitful to show for it? And frankly, if you read the New Testament, Jesus was generally up early in the morning, either doing something with people or praying, going off by himself. He started very early. So Joshua's starting out really early. The next thing is they set out from the acacia groves. And this is where they had encamped when Joshua sent out the 2 messengers who found Rahab. Now, when I think of a grove and I hear acacia grove, I think of like this beautiful grove of trees somewhere. In fact, it's just the opposite. Acacia trees are hardy. They withstand weather and insects, which is probably why God told Moses to build the ark out of the material. It was going to last a long time. But they're also full of thorns and sharp points and spines. So from this place of harshness, abrasiveness, painful piercing, and difficulty, they set out. And they come to the Jordan. And they rest 3 days before crossing the Jordan and entering the Promised Land. And finally, they're to follow the ark, but at a distance of 2,000 cubits. How many of you know your cubits? It's at least a half a mile. I'm wearing these. I don't think they had those back then. We're supposed to follow the ark, but we have to stay at least a half a mile away. They must have had awesome eyesight. Their shoes didn't wear out, and God gave them, I don't know, 15 vision or something. I want to add a little more detail here, because remember what the ark contained. Manna, the bread of life, Aaron's rod, representing priestly authority, and the tablets of the law, representing the authority of the king. From thorns to a place of rest for 3 days to entering the Promised Land. And then the people following from a distance, the ark that represents the presence of the Holy One. I'll leave that to you to decide if there's a pattern there. In verse 5, Joshua said to the people, "Sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you." Man, I love that sentence. I would love to hear that. Tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. So, preparing for spiritual warfare, the people were to consecrate themselves first. We cannot enter any battle against the forces of darkness until we sanctify ourselves. And how do we do that? By putting on our full spiritual armor. Now, not surprisingly, Yahweh had already laid down a spiritual minefield against their enemies. If we read in Joshua 5:1, there's a transition here. It appears to be Joshua writing in his own hand at this point. We don't really know, but he uses the word "we." "So it was when all of the kings of the Amorites who were on the west side of the Jordan and all the kings of the Canaanites who were by the sea heard that the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan from before the children of Israel until we had crossed over, that their heart melted, and there was no spirit in them any longer because of the children of Israel." Armies were scared. The enemy armies were scared. And if you want to dig a little deeper here, I'm not going to go into it, but you can note that there are 7 nations that Israel needs to defeat: the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Jebusites. They've already defeated 3 nations east of the Jordan: Sihon and Og in Numbers 21 and Deuteronomy 2 and 3, and the Amalekites in Exodus 17. 10 nations, 10 kings, 7 and 3. Maybe that pattern reminds you of something in Daniel or Revelation. Might be an interesting study. Not today. We got other things to do. So the kings of the nations were scared. It's a perfect time to attack your enemy, right? Except the book of Joshua is teaching us about spiritual warfare, not the strategies of physical warfare. And one of our motives in studying the book of Joshua is to understand the difference between the two. And we'll see it's quite different from how we would go to battle. And one of the main lessons we're going to learn is that the first step in any battle is to be spiritually prepared. We're going to find out that Joshua, under instruction from the Lord, doing something that has to be, from a military standpoint, disastrous. In Joshua 5, verse 2, we read, "At that time the Lord said to Joshua, 'Make flint knives for yourselves and circumcise the sons of Israel,' again the second time. So Joshua made flint knives for himself and circumcised the sons of Israel. at Gibeath Haraloth, translated Foreskin Hill. Going down to verse 8, so it was when they had finished circumcising all the people that they stayed in their place in the camp till they were healed. Good idea. Then the Lord said to Joshua, this day I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. Now, what was that reproach? Well, we didn't read it, but if you go back to verse 5, we read that all the males coming out of Egypt had been circumcised. But they all died having failed to circumcise their infants during the wilderness. You could say the children of Israel were reborn that day and were consecrated on the 8th day, spiritually speaking. Then they kept the Passover for the first time since Egypt. Now, I'm kind of a visual person, and I like to picture this situation. They're in the Israeli war room, Joshua and his generals. And Joshua is laying out the plan for his generals. And he's telling them that in order to defeat this enemy, first, circumcise all of the males who are going to war. And then the whole nation's going to have a banquet outside the gates of Jericho. I'd love to see what the faces of the generals were like at that point in time. That's how we're going to win this battle. But it reminds me of Psalm 23. Beginning in verse 5, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So here they are celebrating the Passover right outside the main stronghold of the Amorites, who are the most powerful of the 7 nations that they are going to go to war with and dispossess of the land. That's not chutzpah. That's complete faith in the one true God. If you remember the story of the unjust judge and the persistent widow in Luke 18, we read, and shall not God not avenge his own elect who cry out day and night to him, though he bears long with them? I tell you that he will avenge them speedily. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he really find faith on the earth? We know that the planet Earth at this moment is Satan's domain. You and I, whether we like it or not, are engaged in warfare. And one of the lessons we're going to learn, just like Joshua, is that we don't fight to obtain victory. Victory is already ours if we have faith in the one who promises to fight our battles for us. Now, most of you know the story of Jericho, so I'm not going to go through that whole process. But I'd like to think about that process from the standpoint of warfare strategy. I once read that there are 3 strategies to do God's work. First, make the best plans we can, carry them out to the best of our ability. It sounds good. That's strike 1. The second is to have carefully laid plans and be determined to carry them through, and then ask God to help us, to prosper us in connection with them. That's strike 2. Or the third strategy, begin with God, ask him what his plans are, and offer ourselves to him to carry out his purposes. If you're a baseball nut, that's a guaranteed hit. Though it's often the least plausible solution, and sometimes it makes no sense at all to us until we receive the victory at the end. 1 Corinthians 1, starting in verse 25, says, because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. For you see your calling, brethren, that not many wise according to the flesh, not many, not many noble are called. But God has chosen the foolish things of the world to put to shame the wise. And God has chosen the weak things of the world to put to shame the things which are mighty. And the base things of the world and the things which are despised, God has chosen. And the things which are not, to bring to nothing the things that are, that no flesh should glory in his presence. Now, most of you know about the plan to circle the walls of Jericho. That, of course, had to be another interesting war room discussion between Joshua and his generals. But if we stop for a second and we read this through, we discover some things that I find pretty fascinating about this particular battle. Now, we don't know what day the Israelites were to begin their trek around Jericho. It doesn't say. But I'm guessing, this is just thus saith Bill, but I'm guessing it was the first day of the week. And I believe that because otherwise the Sabbath is just another day sandwiched somewhere in those 7 days that they're to march around the city. And if you study carefully, you'll discover they seem to break pretty much every law in the Torah. The Ark of the Covenant wasn't supposed to go to war. It's in the middle of the procession. The Levites were exempt from military duty. They're in the procession. And the people were supposed to work 6 days and rest on the seventh, and yet on the seventh day, they worked 7 times as hard. But that seventh day was the day of victory promised by God. So yes, the foolishness of God is wiser than men. The weakness of God is stronger than men. Something to ponder. And just as happened with Lot in Sodom, Rahab and her family were removed from the place of sin before the Israelites destroyed the city. We read in Joshua 6, verse 21, they turned over everyone in the city for destruction and executed them, including both men and women, young and old, and oxen, sheep, and donkeys. Now, some people get upset with the times when Israel is told by Yahweh to wipe out everything living. But we have to remember Rahab is not only a testimony of God's grace, but she's also an indictment of the rest of the city. Way back in Joshua 2, beginning in verse 8, we read, now before they lay down, and these were the 2 messengers that Joshua had sent out, she, Rahab, came up to them on the roof and said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land, that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land are faint-hearted because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were on the other side of the Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. And as soon as we heard these things, our hearts melted. Neither did there remain any more courage in anyone because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. For those of you that remember that, I read that in part 1. Rahab is a Canaanite, worshiping pagan gods, and yet she is the one that said, the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. How did she know that? See, the people of the city knew, and they had every opportunity to repent. They apparently knew who God was. In fact, they had about 400 years to turn themselves around. But she alone chose to repent, and no one else did. You wonder why he wiped out the entire city. But they burned the city and all that was in it, this is verse 6, with fire. Only the silver and gold and the vessels of bronze and iron they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. So this was the first battle. And this was their offering of firstfruits to the Lord. This is something I think we all kind of need to keep in the back of our mind when we receive a victory that we know on our own we probably wouldn't have accomplished. First fruits to the Lord. So as we read Joshua, we recognize a primary requirement for defeating the Amorites at Jericho wasn't their military skill. It was their spiritual preparation and their willingness to listen to and obey the voice of Yahweh, even when it seemed to make no sense. Now, we love to learn lessons from those who are victorious. We want to emulate whatever they did so that we too can become successful. But often our best lessons come from our defeats. So let's take a look at the next battle. Let's call it Lessons from the Defeat at Ai. In chapter 7 of Joshua, we read about the first and really the only major defeat in the conquest. It's interesting how victory in our lives is so often immediately followed by a major defeat. In fact, if you're spiritually sensitive and aware of the spiritual warfare in your life, whenever something really great happens, it's probably a good time to be on your guard, because there's a good chance that an attack is right around the corner. See, that's the time we're most vulnerable. That's when our guard is down, and that's exactly what we're going to see happens to the nation of Israel. So let's discover some lessons that you and I can apply to our own lives that Joshua and the nation of Israel experienced at a place called Ai. So if you still have your hand in Joshua, if you go to Joshua chapter 7, beginning in verse 1. We read, "But the children of Israel committed a trespass regarding the accursed things. For Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zabdi, the son of Zerah of the tribe of Judah, took of the accursed things. So the anger of the Lord burned against the children of Israel." Okay, when you see a chapter start with the word "but," it's usually never a good thing. And it's not in this particular place. But let's dig into this little paragraph a little deeper. Accursed things. The word is cherem. This word actually more accurately means dedicated things or things which should have been destroyed. In Zechariah, the word's translated utter destruction. Remember, the Israelites were told by God to destroy everything except the items which survived the fire, which were to be dedicated to him. They failed to do that. And finally, we have this guy, Achan, whose actions anger our father to the point that he tells Joshua, Israel is doomed for destruction unless drastic measures take place. Interesting that his lineage was given to us. Again, I always love to figure out, why is that in there? Well, you'll notice Achan is the grandson of Zerah of the tribe of Judah. And Zerah had a twin brother named Perez. In fact, Zerah and Perez are the twin sons born out of the sordid relationship between Judah and his daughter-in-law, Tamar. Perez goes on to father a lineage that includes Boaz, David, ultimately Jesus himself. Zerah fathers a line that almost leads to Israel's destruction. I think that's there purposefully, because it reminds me of the twins, Jacob and Esau. And though Ishmael and Isaac weren't twins, the other brother scenario, I get the sense that Satan uses the unanointed brothers to lay down a minefield in an attempt to thwart God's plan for Israel. And that leads eventually to you and me. We read on, Joshua 7, beginning in verse 2. Now Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, which is beside Beth Aven. Interesting, it's translated house of vanity. That actually will come up here. On the east side of Bethel, and spoke to them, saying, Go up and spy out the country. So the men went up and spied out Ai. They returned to Joshua, said to him, Do not let all the people go up, but let about 2,000 or 3,000 men go up and attack Ai. Do not weary all the people there, for the people of Ai are few. I have a question for you. Is prayer your steering wheel or your spare tire? I'll let you swirl that around a little bit. The first mistake, did Joshua go before the Lord and ask what to do next? Nope. He made the decision on his own. It's easy after the fact to see your victory as something that came about because of who you are and what you did. Second mistake, the scouts aren't just bringing back intelligence, they're offering advice. How did that work out 40 years before when the scouts brought back their opinions to Moses? You see, fear always makes the enemy appear larger than he is, but pride can make him appear less than he is, which can easily lead to failure in an arena that we and others may consider our strong suits. Peter is a perfect example of that, right? Of all the disciples, he was the boldest. He was always charging off. At Gethsemane, he took out his sword and cut off the ear of the priest's servant. If you're going to pick a disciple who's going to deny the Lord, he'd probably be the last one on your list. He was a ready, fire, aim kind of guy. He did foolish things. He made mistakes, but you would never look at him as a coward. And yet we all know he's famous for being the one to deny the Lord. He was blindsided, caught off guard. And I'm guessing that most of us here, and those of you listening, have been blindsided at least once in your life, caught completely off guard in the place you consider your place of strength. For the people of Israel, how could there be any defeats? They had God's promises. They had the Ark of the Covenant in the midst of the camp. They had his anointed leader in charge of everything. Hadn't they just been circumcised? Needless to say, Israel was defeated at Ai. And afterwards, Joshua and the elders threw dust on their heads, tore their clothes as an expression of remorse. Problem was, the time to humble ourselves is before the battle, not after. Because when we're given the armor of God, we need to put all of it on and leave it on. Because if we attempt to change our wardrobe in the middle of the battle, our success rate goes way down. The time to humble ourselves before the throne of God is before the decision is made and before the action takes place. When we look at Achan's sin, we see a sequence of steps, each of which, if he'd put his armor on ahead of time, it could have stopped him before he committed the act. We know that the eye can be a portal to sin. Achan saw, he coveted, he took. That's actually a form of idolatry. In Colossians chapter 3, beginning in verse 5, we read, Therefore put to death your members which are on the earth, fornication, uncleanness, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry. Idolatry is anything that diverts you from putting God first. And he makes it clear he doesn't want to be number one on your top 10 list. He wants to be number one on your list of one. If Achan had been able to look ahead and see Malachi, he would have seen what God says in Malachi 3, bring the entire tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. So put me to the test in this right now, says the Lord of the heavenly armies, and see if I won't throw open the windows of heaven for you and pour out on you blessing without measure. If Achan had waited, he probably would have ended up with far more than he had stolen that day. Instead, he lost everything, including his life. So what lessons can we learn from the defeated Ai? First, having confidence in ourselves rather than our Father is not a road to success. Despite what the song says, it wasn't Joshua who fought the battle of fit. I said it fit because that's what the song says. It wasn't Joshua who fought the battle of Jericho. It was the Lord's victory. Second, before any consequential decision, pray. If Joshua had asked God before sending his scouts to Ai, things probably would have turned out much differently. Third, don't be in the same room with disobedience. The Israelites had corporate responsibility. It wasn't just one guy. Yes, Achan took the stuff. But Joshua, the scouts, his military commanders, all were responsible for attempting to fight a battle without God's permission or help. Right now we are in enemy territory. And victory over our enemy only comes when we understand and utilize the weapons of defense and offense promised to us by our Father. Ultimately, Joshua learned that lesson. And by heeding the voice of God, he went back and defeated not only Ai, but every other nation that had occupied the land. We read in Joshua 11, verse 23, so Joshua took the whole land according to all that the Lord had said to Moses, and Joshua gave it as an inheritance to Israel according to their divisions by their tribes. And then the land rested from war. It's true that Joshua was appointed and anointed by God, but he was still just a man. And our Father teaches us his lessons in holiness and humility, not just in our victories, but also in our defeats. When you abide in him and still suffer loss, know you're being taught something by him. Every time I fail, I know our Father wants me to use that to learn something. And it's not always just for me. Sometimes it's because he knows I am going to cross paths with somebody who went through exactly what I just went through. One of my consistent prayers is, please don't let these lessons be wasted. I do not want to have to repeat them over and over. And finally, we need to be aware of and in pursuit of the enemy. Not just waiting around for him to attack. Because he disguises himself as an angel of light, but he can also show up in a three-piece suit with a briefcase full of temptations. And we need to be equipped, prepared at all times, to be on the offensive and be ready to attack the enemy at every turn, knowing that if we are strong and courageous, are not afraid and not dismayed, and are obedient to his word, the Lord our God will be with us wherever we go.